Awesome. Hello, guys, and welcome this afternoon. I am joined by the one and only Jacob Mackey, um, author, professor, amazing individual who is
Oh,
very open minded. I wrote an essay for a platform that you're a part of last year. I published that last year, and thank you for that opportunity. Jacob, please introduce yourself for the people tuning in today before we get into this topic of microaggression sensitivity training.
all right. Yeah. Well, Kimmy, it's great to see you again, even if it's only virtually. And thank you so much for having me. Um, my name is my full name is Jacob Lewis Mackey. I go by Jake, and I am a associate professor of classics at Occidental College in Los Angeles. And of course, classics means ancient Greek and Roman civilization. I teach the languages, the literature, the mythology, the religion, the culture, the history, you name it. Um, that's me. I've written a recent book on that came out last year on Roman religion, and it combines research from psychology and cognitive science to try to make sense of what the Romans were doing with their rituals and their practices. So that, in a very brief nutshell, is me. What I do professionally. I also, Kimmy, as you alluded to, you published a great essay
Oh, thanks.
on in the Journal of Free Black Thought, which I help edit, and so that is part of Free Black Thought, which can be found on Twitter at it's at free BLCK no A thought free bulk thought. um, but I'm part of that. There's seven of us, and I'm one of the members of that organization, and happy to talk about that too. But yeah, your essay. I think you may have the record for the number of likes for anything
Oh,
published in our journal. I think that may be true. Yeah.
that's awesome to hear. Quick question: how do you spell the thought in the Twitter handle? I want to type it
Oh,
for anyone who wants to look it up.
sure.
Um,
Yeah. It's free, and then it's
B
BLCK. So all it is missing an A, and then thought is just THOUGHT.
noted. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right,
No.
let me just drop
No,
that in the
it's
comments.
not like THOT or
Right.
something.
Okay. Bet.
It's
All
not.
right.
Yeah.
Here we go. Dropping that in the comments if you guys want to check that out. I feel like that's my initial encounter with getting connected to you was through following Free Black Thought on Twitter,
Mm, that's right.
and they were posting very thoughtful and sort of nuanced ideas from Black individuals, which at the time I felt like I was kind of in this secret undercover searching for people who are thinking outside of the box as well, period
Mhm,
of time in 2020, 2021. And
mhm.
then I stumbled across Free Black Thought, and that was how I was like, oh, well, this is really cool. There are more people who think outside of the box and who are or happen to be Black. The
Yeah.
topic of the word Black is a whole conversation on its own. But today we're talking about microaggressions. And there is a very interesting thing happening on college campuses today. But before we get into that, um, Jake, you've had some experiences with microaggressions, as have I feel like if you're tuning in, you might be familiar with the fact that I kind of went through brainwashing, um, or quote unquote brainwashing in a sense where empowerment programs, empowerment philosophies, ideas, ideologies were sort of educated or delivered to me through college. And I took them in, I drank them in, and I thought, the more I get people to care about the things I'm offended by, the better my life would be. But it turned out to be quite the opposite. I was
Mhm,
sort of drunk with cynicism and
mhm.
kind of delved into depression and anxiety and what I can only describe as like fragility, where anything anyone said that was a little off would just tip me the wrong way and just ruin my day. And I felt that to be just the opposite of empowerment. But so that's my experience. But Jacob, you also have your experience with microaggressions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would imagine that anyone who's a fan of your channel, they will have heard you talk about CRT and microaggressions and things like that. But and we can get deeper into what a microaggression is and all the theory behind it, and then the sort of debates about it. But
Yeah.
yes, yeah. So I mean, microaggressions are these sort of they're micro. They're these small slights or insults that happen to the initial idea of the paradigm was that it happens mainly to people of color, racial and ethnic minorities, but then it got extended to encompass also sort of people with who are not heteronormative and or women as opposed to men or queer and then it also got extended to people with disabilities, and that's me because I was born missing. This is my left arm here, so that's my elbow. That's I was just born like that, and so here I am. And so I'm a person with a disability, although that's not like an important part of my sort of self conception. But
Right.
as a person, with a different body, so I'm Gen X, and so when I was growing up, I experienced both macroaggressions, like people, attacking me, like physically attacking me, because of this, like, oh, and then just insulting me, and then
Yeah.
like active, like yelling at me, you one arm, blah blah blah. But then I also, of course, experienced what I did not know to call at the time microaggressions. So I would have, and I
Mm.
have it to this day. I mean, it happens like on a monthly basis. People, if they see me tie my shoes, they'll say, "Oh, I'm amazed you can tie your shoes." And it's just sort of like, I'm a 52-year-old man with a PhD from Princeton University, and you're surprised I can tie my shoes. Like, thank you. um, and things like, and if someone sees me driving a car, they'll be like, "Whoa, I never thought about that." But yeah, dude, you can drive. What do you know? And it's like, yeah, I've been doing it since I was 16. But
Right.
so I never knew to call these things microaggressions. But then when I learned about the theory of microaggressions, I was like, oh, that's what's been happening to me all my life.
Mm.
People have been doing this kind of thing. Um, and then, as I got deeper into the theory, I learned that these microaggressions are supposed to be deeply damaging and wounding to people and cause significant harm. And again, as a Generation X person, I grew up with this idea that, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me, like that
Yeah.
was pounded into my,
Oh yeah.
head, like everyone in my generation. And so I thought, are you kidding? Like this stuff, I mean, it's sort of dumb and it's annoying, but hurt me, impact me, like cause significant harm, like give me a break.
Mhm.
And then and so your story actually for me confirms what I suspected, which I said to myself, if someone, when I was like 13,
Yeah.
15, 16, if someone has told me that these things, these microaggressions, can cause significant harm and deeply hurt me, if I had really believed that, my life could have ended up very different, right? I
Yeah.
could be now a sort of broken, like damaged, like person who
Mhm.
feels that they've been under assault for their whole life because this stuff it happens constantly, and it
Exactly.
rolls off of me. I don't care. I know the person
Mhm.
didn't do anything, but yeah, I could have, in a sense, become a victim.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
your story tells me that yes, that's exactly what happens if you tell someone this when they're
Yeah.
at a young age, right? Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Because you can, you know, people might not see it this way, but the compounding effect of it is really where the harm sets in.
mm,
Harm, right? Like if
mhm,
you have one slight every day, just every day for 30 days, that's a day where like cognitively you're not actually like all there. So
mhm,
you're kind of going through life under this like dark cloud. And it does compound. It's like, okay, you spent all those days probably giving half of what you could give to whatever task you're doing. And then
mhm,
down the line, you spend a year under this cloud and this mindset. Like, just think about like the output, just mentally, physically.
mhm,
That compounds and it literally diverts you into a different path. And so, of course, we have these programs as we study microaggressions. You have these professors and academics saying, hey, let other people fix themselves so that you can be coddled and protected.
Hmm.
Don't worry about it. We'll deal with it by pointing the finger at the other people.
Hmm.
But we are afraid to talk about what about like us? What about our internal locus of control? Like, do we have a say
Yeah.
in how we perceive events, how we perceive life? And I think, yeah, we're learning about different ways to tackle this, but I think there's a huge element missing in our like individual selves, like the person
Hmm.
who happens to not be heteronormative. So are you familiar with sort of the origins of this school of thought? How did we get to this point where, like you said, you were aware of macroaggressions, and then there was a shift into learning about microaggressions? How did you learn about how this came into being?
Gosh, I mean, how did I first learn about it, or what have I learned about it since?
Both, a bit of both.
I don't even remember where I first learned about it, but since I'm in academia and professor, these things are just all around, right? They're floating around, and I first heard about it, and I thought, first of all, I thought, I'm sure glad no one ever told me that when I was young, and then I thought, that it sure sounds like a dangerous thing to be teaching people. But then I
Right.
began to have to look into it more deeply because this school I teach at, Occidental College. They began to sort of talk about it, and they began to implement whole sort of offices that offer services related to microaggressions. And so this made me start to take it much more seriously and to look into the research on it.
Hmm.
And so happy to talk about that if you want. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
um,
So this program hinted at it in the title,
yeah.
best, but I actually know very little about it. I was talking to Jacob one day. I was a part of an event at Occidental College, and you mentioned that it's sort of, the acronym, if that's the word, BEST,
Yeah.
is, sort of what they use for this. Apart from that, I literally know nothing. So tell me everything about BEST, what it stands for, what it aims to achieve, who's behind it, and how prevalent it is.
Oh, yeah, I mean, so prevalence. I mean, this stuff is everywhere. Maybe I should say what that word "best" means
Yeah.
or stands for. It's an
Excuse me.
acronym. So Gesundheit. It's an acronym, and it stands for Bias Education and Support Team. So
Mm,
BEST. But there's also a lot of them are also called BERT. Let's see, BIRT. That stands for Bias Incident Response Team. And
gotcha.
so now, if you were to Google, I'll just share just really quickly
Yeah, totally.
a page with your viewers here. If you were to Google like something like best bias response college campuses, you will get, if your viewers can see this,
Yeah.
you will get a there, that makes it bigger actually. You'll just get endless hits.
Mm.
And these things are literally everywhere. They've been implemented in thousands of institutions. And, you know, so there's a lot of concern about them
Hmm.
because, so they're implemented with different levels of sort of wisdom. And so in some
Oh.
places, the way they're implemented, they are a direct, like directly unconstitutional, like they
Oh,
violate
wow.
First Amendment. Yeah, they're on their face. Their own language on the website is unconstitutional because it seeks to suppress speech, and because the idea is that microaggressions take place. A lot of them take place in things people say, and so that these sort of biased statements, you have to suppress them. And so
Mm.
there are organizations, I'm sure many of your viewers know FIRE, the
Yeah.
Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. They have a
Hmm.
place on their website where they break down the different best programs. So if your listeners were to Google, FIRE bias response teams, they'll get all that. They'll get all the relevant pages from FIRE. They break them down. Some are like, as I said, just on their face, just unconstitutional.
Mm.
But others are just they seek to sort of chill expression, or they
Right.
they do it without even seeking to, because they say that there's a whole class of things you can say that are not illegal to say, and they're not the kind of things you can get kicked off campus for saying, and they're not things like racial epithets, but they are nonetheless microaggressions.
Yeah.
And what they say is that if anyone on campus utters a microaggression or makes a microaggression, you can be reported to this team, this bias response team, and this team,
Mhm.
the best team, the BERT team, and this team will then, educate you, or take you aside and do something to sort of set you straight. And that's what you said a minute ago. It gets to what you said, that this model relies on the idea that we're going to fix the world so that you can be okay. Right?
Mm.
And there's no, you lose that locus of control in yourself, right?
Yeah.
Because it's the world that's at fault. The world is microaggressing you, and until the world is fixed, you are going to be harmed, in the
Yeah.
language of the mic. And so yeah, that's the sort of, that's the whole idea behind these things. And so there have been lawsuits. Some schools have been forced by lawsuit to shut theirs down. I believe the University of
Wow.
Texas. Yeah, I believe the University of Texas at Austin had that happen to it. So these are not just uncontroversial offices. That said, I mean, I
Mm.
think it is possible to do these offices in ways that are not necessarily destructive of academic freedom, and
Right.
not necessarily what, suppressive of speech on campus.
Yeah.
I think it's hard. I think it's hard to do it that way,
Mhm.
because when you put people on notice that they can be called into an office and educated or somehow penalized if they accidentally say the wrong thing, I mean, you're going
Mhm.
to have people walking on eggshells, right?
Exactly.
I think that's
Plus, isn't there an element of say turning anything that you don't like, right? As say the victim, turning anything that you don't like into a microaggression claim in
yeah,
order to sort of have control and exert power. Say, for example, if someone said to me, like, oh, I really loved your presentation in class the other day, it was so articulate. I could turn that into a microaggression if I don't like that person
yep,
and literally set them off of a path of just punishment. So
yep,
how, like, is there a sort of criteria for the speech that is speech that is illegal, which
mhm,
that's a little bit of a gray area,
uh-huh,
and just things that aren't, like, is there a defined, like, dictionary of these things
yeah,
that B.E.S.T uses in order
yeah.
to say, okay, yeah, I agree with you, that was a bit suspicious.
Yeah, that's really funny that you bring that up. Yeah. So yeah, you made a few good points there. So on the one hand, you pointed out that almost anything anyone says could be interpreted as a microaggression,
Right.
and so yeah, Musa Al-Gharbi, who's a sociologist at Columbia. I want to talk more about him because he's got the best critique of microaggressions, but he makes this point
Mm.
very eloquently. And when I say eloquently, that could be a microaggression too, because
Oh,
he's
yeah.
he's black. And so for me to have said that, but no, he makes a eloquent uh, example where he points out that if a teacher seems to call, preferentially or too much on a student, that could be taken, as some kind of microaggression. Or if the
Mhm.
teacher then decides, oh, I'm not going to call on this student, that too could be taken as a microaggression. And so you're
Exactly.
damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Or if you praise them and say that was very well said, it could be taken as a microaggression, because the person could say, what, you assume I couldn't say it well, so
Mhm.
uh, you know anything you say can be potentially be turned into a microaggression. And this is what my students actually tell me. I taught them microaggressions and the critique of microaggressions a couple of weeks ago, and
Mhm.
some of them came up to me afterwards and said, yeah, there are students on this campus who attempt to turn innocent things into microaggressions for the purpose of gaining power over other
Yeah.
people. And
Wow.
so it's a real threat. Now I lost track of. Maybe I responded to everything you said, but no, you had a lot in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, asked about a list. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So there are these lists, lists of fame, like what are called, the canonical microaggressions, the ones that
Oh.
the researchers, sort of um, uh, made, made a list of the original researchers on microaggressions. And yeah, it's things like, well, it is things like, well, okay, one thing is to ask someone to say something like, "Where are you from?" Like,
Mhm.
because it presumes, "Oh, you must not be American," because maybe you have phenotypically Asian, or
Mhm.
Latino, Latina, and so people will say, "Well, where are you from?" And you're assuming I can't be from Los Angeles or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, uh, there's a whole list. Actually, let me just show you some, and
Okay. Oh.
we can just do this right now.
You have that available. That is, yeah, I would love to see that.
Yeah, actually, I have a really neat thing available here,
Oh
that I
boy.
actually got from a publication by Musa Al-Gharbi, and let me just show it to you. There was a study
Mhm.
done on microaggressions where the researchers asked Black and Latino people
Mhm.
if they saw these things, which the research literature says these are microaggressions. Tell me if can you see that well? Is that visible?
I could you scroll a little bit towards, yeah.
There we go.
Perfect.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay. So these researchers polled ethnic and racial minorities and said, simply like, is this offensive or not offensive? And
Mhm.
so the brown line is Latino, the black line is African American, and so this is in the research literature. This is said to be a microaggression. America is a land of opportunity. Well,
Wow.
as you can see, over 90% of Black people and just under 90% of Latinos do not think that that's a microaggression, right?
Yeah.
Microaggression. Yeah, there's where are you from? Well, as you can see, what is it? 83% of Latinos do not find that offensive. Um, they might say, well, I'm from Guatemala, or they might say, my
Right.
parents moved here from Peru and I was born in Los Angeles. They just don't care. They're not
Mhm.
bothered by it.
Yeah.
Uh, Another one that's supposed to be deeply offensive is to sort of pretend to say that you're colorblind, to say I don't notice people's race. Well, as you can see, 80% of Latinos just don't care, and
Yeah.
72% of Black people just don't care. America is a melting pot, so 78% of uh, African Americans don't find that offensive, and 70% of Latinos don't find that offensive. So these things that these researchers are
Yeah.
telling people, these researchers are sitting there telling minorities, that they need to be offended, that they are offended by these things, and they're just not. They're just not when
Uh,
you tell them. So, yeah.
I'm curious. The whole, like, I do not see race. To
Hmm.
me, I feel like a lot of those other questions are based on the assumption that it's sort of on a colorblind premise. For example, saying where are you from?
Uh huh.
You want to, you know, it wants you to assume that, like, hey, this person could be American. They could be from anywhere.
Uh huh.
But then at the same time, it wants to play colorblind, and then at the same time,
Yeah.
it wants to fight color blindness. And
Hmm.
so I'm confused about where these canonical microaggressions come from
Yeah.
and why they contradict each other. And, like, are you familiar with, like, where these are stemming from? Because it seems like
Yeah.
a lot of the people don't mind most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, most people. So, I mean, the people who dreamt this whole thing up are, they are sort of elite academics,
Right.
and of course, some of them are people of color. In fact, you
Yeah.
know, um, but their sort of, their theory of the world, their model of how the world works is highly skewed by the fact that
Yeah.
they have PhDs from Harvard and stuff like that.
That
Uh,
part.
what's that? What's that?
I just said that part. Like, that's fascinating.
Yeah, and so sort of normal people who are not PhDs, teaching at an Ivy League school, just don't have the same elite beliefs as these folks. So let's see if you okay, there you go. You can see this here.
Yeah.
This is the article where it all started. Um,
Mm,
it's the author here. The main author is Daryl Wing Su, and he and there's a bunch of other authors on this article. But in 2007, they put out this article, "Racial Microaggressions in Everyday Life." Oh gosh, what's the journal? It's like American Psychologist or something like that. And they
right.
listed, and they just came up with these microaggressions. And you have to imagine that they were drawing on their own experience, and they were just sort of looking around in their own head and saying, like,
Mhm.
well, what offends me? And so they wrote
Mm,
those down. But again, when you go out and ask, a Latino guy who runs um, a construction company, or a black woman who's a lawyer or whatever, uh,
yeah.
they haven't been taught to think that it's a microaggression to say that America is a land of opportunity. So
Right.
that's where the problem is. We now have whole offices on every college campus in America teaching students that these things are harmful and damaging to them, and
Mhm.
they wouldn't have known it, most of them, otherwise, right?
Yeah.
The polling suggests they just wouldn't have thought so unless they were taught to think so.
Mhm.
So, and that's where
Wow.
I see the real danger and harm in this, and that is a harm, actually.
Right.
Unlike, unlike
Exactly.
yeah,
The
yeah,
real harm of it all.
yep, yep,
So I'm curious, how do we let should we take this seriously at all? Like, is there any sort of data to say this does cause the real harm? Are you familiar with any sort of studies, like apart
yeah,
from our individual experiences?
yeah,
Is there any hard evidence to say like, okay, best is working, or like best is definitely not working,
yeah.
and producing negative results?
I mean, so we know there's some negative results insofar as there have been massive controversies and lawsuits, and campus life has been disrupted uh,
Hmm.
because of best. Um, um, there's all sorts of stories about that. Again, I mean, the lawsuits, are you can't deny that there have been lawsuits because people have been they have their rights have been trampled on because of best. So
Mm,
these biased response teams. So that's clearly a problem. That's a harm, right?
yeah.
But yeah, but I think you probably meant more like, well, um, did you more mean to this, to ask, do we have reason to believe that teaching young people that these otherwise innocent sounding phrases are harmful? Do we have reason to believe that that's bad for them, right? Is that what you're
Yeah,
asking? Yeah,
that's sort of my question, like outside of testimonies or like
yeah.
people posting their stories on YouTube, like do we have anyone doing any research that's like published to say, this is like the long-term study of these individuals and their outcomes, or does that not exist at all?
I don't think that exists yet. I
Okay.
don't believe now. So yeah. So actually, though, here's the interesting thing.
Hmm.
There's actually no or very little empirical research uh, to suggest that microaggressions hurt anyone. So I mean, that would be
Oh,
like the first hurdle anyone would want to clear. I mean, we've set up offices on every college campus in America now
right. Yeah.
to deal with these things on the premise that these things are harmful. However, there just is no empirical good evidence that they are. That's
Hmm.
and so that right there, says, what are we doing with these offices? Are we
Yeah.
wasting money and wasting resources, wasting time? Uh, and furthermore, then the question of, are we actually ending up hurting people by teaching them to be harmed? Right now, so on that question, and I want to return to Musa Al Garbi here, and
Yeah, for sure.
let me share a different document with you, because he says some thing. I couldn't say it better than what he says. So let me
Hmm.
just share it here. Um, And so he's this sociologist at Columbia, and
Mhm.
he reviewed the microaggression literature in an article. And he said, "Look, there simply is no empirical evidence to suggest that microaggressions hurt anyone. Even if we agree, as you and I do, Kimmy, that there are microaggressions, we've both experienced them.
Yeah.
He says there's no evidence that those cause you anything more than annoyance, like in the
Right.
moment.
Exactly.
And so there's no evidence that they hurt you, but he says we do need to be careful because, okay, and I want to just read. He says that there's a long and ignoble history of harm caused by hastily applied and often later discredited social and psychological research, with the costs borne primarily by women, people of color, the poor, and other vulnerable populations. Guarding against iatrogenesis and adverse second order effects is important, including for minorities, perhaps especially for minorities. Iatrogenesis, that's a Greek, it's from the Greek. Iatro means like doctor, and genesis means origin. So the
Mm.
idea that the healer causes the harm, right?
Oh,
Um,
wow.
because these bias response teams it's a kind of therapeutic healing uh, 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 institution, right? The idea is to
Mhm.
help you recover from your microaggression, but by teaching you that you've been deeply harmed, the healer may be actually causing more harm than the initial
Ah,
wound does.
right.
So he's saying in our attempts to help people, we may be actually harming them. And he says, yeah, so for instance, he says it seems highly plausible that poorly conceived or implemented policies intended to address microaggressions could endanger the free exchange of ideas. Well, we know that's true. I mean, there have been lawsuits won over that, lead to unjustly severe consequences for minor or even unintentional infractions. Again, that definitely happens.
Mhm.
Heightened animus between minority and majority groups. And this is one that I really worry about, because if you tell all the black students coming onto campus that all their white peers, who are almost inevitably going to be in the majority unless it's an HBCU, if you tell
Mhm.
them those white peers are likely to microaggress against them and hurt them, you're setting these two groups, you're setting them up as opposed camps. That,
Exactly.
it's just, yeah, it couldn't be
Right.
worse for sort of harmony. Uh, or even exacerbate the harm caused by microaggressions, right? So, and it does
Mhm.
that by making people more sensitive to perceived slights or injustices. And that's, you talked eloquently about that, right? So, again, he goes on, not to sort of just over do it with the reading of Musa al Gharbi, but I think now this gets to your point because you
Mhm.
did ask, you said, is there any evidence that teaching people about microaggressions or setting up these bias response teams causes harm? And he says, we don't have direct evidence of that, but what we do know, and this should be legible to everyone, there is
Mhm.
abundant research demonstrating harm caused by heightened perceptions of racism, discrimination, racialized violence, and racial inequality. So if you are trained to see more of it and you come to see more of it, it actually has, well, as he says, well established and highly adverse impacts on the psychological and even physical well being of people of color when they perceive more racism, racial inequality, and discrimination. So,
Yep.
so there is a certain amount of racism, racial inequality, and discrimination in the world, right? But if you
Mhm.
make that the diet, if you make that the breakfast, lunch, and dinner
Right.
of everyone, it's going to cause harms, and it'll be less harmful to people like me, a white guy, a straight white guy, right?
Mm.
I will think it sucks. I will be very unhappy about it. I may donate money to BLM or whatever, but if I'm black, it's potentially going to have a really negative impact on my psychological health and even my physical health, right? So,
Right.
we have to be careful, how we handle these things. So, okay, so there you go. So it's not direct evidence that teaching people to be offended by microaggressions, causes demonstrable harm, but it's good reason to think that it might, right?
Yeah.
Good reason
Exactly.
to think it might. Yeah. So. Yeah.
Um,
I will shut
is
up.
there
I've been going on here. Yeah. So go ahead, please.
like a sort of, this is hard to ask because I'm not a doctor or a psychologist,
Hmm.
but is there a way to literally rewire the brain to actually like, quite literally experience trauma or be trained to be traumatized
Mm-hmm.
the same way you would be, say, traumatized by like a car accident or like
Hmm. Hmm.
abandonment in childhood?
Hmm.
Is this something that are you familiar with any like psychological studies on that outside of like what you just read from Algarby,
Yeah.
or is it just sensitivity? Is it just becoming extra sensitive? If that
Yeah.
question makes any sense at all.
It does, and I mean, I am a classicist. I am not a psychologist or or a neuroscientist, a neurologist or anything. So
Yeah.
I'm speaking outside of my lane here.
Hmm.
Okay, but here's what I do know from reading the literature produced by people who are, whose field it is. What I know is that there's this thing in recent years called concept creep.
Yes.
There's a 2016 article by Nick Haslam, Haslam, called Concept Creep, and he talks about trauma
Hmm.
and other things, harm he talks about too. And yeah, this idea of trauma, once upon a time, but like in 100 years ago, trauma meant physical, like trauma to your body and
Hmm.
organs. And then it rightly got extended to PTSD, right? Psychological, post traumatic stress syndrome, where you have not been physically damaged, but you have received such a sort of psychological blow that you have symptoms, psychological symptoms.
Hmm.
Since then, and that happened in, oh God, I don't know when it was, 70s, 80s, something like that. Since then, though, trauma has been expanded to include everything. Like if you went to the grocery store and they didn't have what you were looking for, it was
Hmm.
traumatic for you,
Right.
right? And so, okay, now here I'm going outside my lane. I really just, I'm saying what I think, and it's just an educated guess. Not
Okay.
It's not even that educated because I'm just not a psychologist. But I think if you tell people that more and more things are traumatic and more things are going to disrupt their inner lives in really, really deep ways, I think people match themselves to what you tell them, and
Yeah.
they let it happen. And I think you see we have this massive, massive, what's the word? Mental health epidemic among young people right now, and
Hmm.
it's not a coincidence, I don't think, that it's happening at the
Exactly.
exact
Yeah.
same time that we're telling them that everything is a trauma,
Hmm.
um, and everything hurts them, and everything is a harm. I mean, just to give you an example of just how bad it is, the mental health crisis at my school, from the spring of 2022, last year, to the fall of 2022, uh, hospitalizations for suicide attempts went up 600%.
No way.
Yeah, and they were already high. It wasn't like that does not mean we went from
Whoa.
0 to 6 or whatever, whatever, right? It means we
Right.
went from a lot to holy
Yeah.
shit, this is a lot. And so, it's coming at the same time that all the emails from the administration are telling the students that they live in a white supremacist society that's filled with violence against people of color, and that everything that happens in the world, they will send out emails that start by saying, this latest event, and it'll be something, it'll be like the Michigan shooter yesterday,
Exactly.
which is a
Yeah.
horrible event. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong, it's horrible.
Hmm.
They'll send out an email saying, you it would be it's totally reasonable for you students to be, traumatized, broken, wounded, unable to go on in light of what happened yesterday. We have our counseling center open for you. So that they're reinforcing that, yeah, you probably should be traumatized. You probably should be deeply
That's
wounded.
insane.
Yeah. So I mean, again, it's but the news, that's the thing. If you if you choose to, you can spend the rest of your life watching nothing but horror in the news.
Mhm.
Look what just happened in Turkey, right?
Yeah.
If you chose, you could linger over every single one of those horrible deaths, and you could do
Mhm.
that till the day you die and never and still not be done with it. You know what I mean? Like,
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
we've got to like the world is what it is, and we've got to somehow get through it without being completely ground down and broken by it, right? So,
Right.
and I think we're
Man.
doing the opposite right now. We're telling people that they should be broken and ground down by it.
Yeah.
So
It's
that's
it's really crazy because you think, well, I'm not a fan of conspiracy theories, to be honest. I feel like conspiracy theories make you look for evil that doesn't exist,
mhm,
where there's a lot of evil that's already present, and
mm,
so you tend to sort of excuse what is before you to look for things that are unseen. But
mhm,
it really does make me wonder, like, if you are truly a racist, say you are secretly a member of like the KKK,
mm,
to put it a little too strong, right? Just to use a
mhm,
very extreme example,
sure.
how would you want, you've seen change happen in America, you've seen opportunity spread to everyone. How can you still instill sort of racial ideas and make one group less than the other? And I can't help but feel, to some extent, the way some of this training is, just pushed and promoted, it just makes me wonder, are there actually, like, truly
Yeah,
motivated racists behind this?
yeah.
Obviously, that's a bit of a dramatic, like, I'm going way too far, but it's like, hey, I mean, how do
Yeah,
people not see this?
I totally get where you're coming from, and I mean, this is why John McWhorter wrote a book, Woke Racism, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because, he doesn't say that he thinks it's white supremacists doing a sneaky conspiracy theory, but he says, if you wanted to, if you wanted to sort of, hurt people of color, this is how you would do it.
Yeah.
This is how you would do it. And yeah, no, I mean, personally, I think it's actually good intentions gone very wrong. That's what
Right.
I think it is. That's really what I think it is.
Do you think money has sort of poisoned our racial intentions?
Well, absolutely. And so there, actually, I don't even think it's good intentions. I think it's the profit motive too, because so these bias response teams are part of this billion-dollar industry called DEI,
Oh yeah.
diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I truly believe most people who go into it with the best of intentions. But if you want to talk
Yeah.
about something systemic, what's systemic is the sort of the incentives that are built into that DEI industry. The
Right.
incentives are never to turn down the heat. The incentives
Oof.
are never, right? The incentives are never to tell people, you know what? You're good. You've got this. You're cool. Everything's going to be okay. The incentive is to say you're not good. You're actually in danger. You're being harmed. The incentive is to say we live in such a racist society that we need to do all these billion-dollar interventions, right? Those are the incentives. So yeah,
Right.
money, again, I think most individuals, they mean the best, but I think the overall sort of systemic incentive structure of the DEI complex is such as to create problems rather than solve them. And it's not that there aren't problems that need to be solved. There are.
Right.
I've seen them. but
Yeah.
but I don't think overall that industry has the right answers. I just don't. Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Well, I know you have to go soon, but I am so, so, so grateful for everything that you have shared. Thank you so much, Jake. And hopefully, we can continue talking about this topic down the
Yeah.
line if there are any
Absolutely.
developments.
Yeah.
Um, is there anything you'd like to share, or any final thoughts, or maybe perhaps let people know where they can find you?
Sure. Well, could I actually share one final story?
Yeah, totally.
So, we were talking about these bias response teams and how they're getting set up everywhere. And they set one up on my campus and they used all this language. They said, that significant harms can be done unintentionally by people saying things that sort of make you feel slighted.
Hmm.
They did the whole thing. They set it up. Now here's a success story, and maybe I want to leave you with a good story, a success
Yeah.
story. They set it up, and um, I was able to coordinate with the faculty and say, listen, we should try to shut this thing down, or at least minimize the harm it can do. And what we succeeded in doing by banding together was, first of all, we got faculty exempted from it. So originally they had it
Ooh.
so that a student could go to a class, hear something from the professor that he or she didn't like, and then go report the professor. Now, why is this a problem? Let me just go on a slight tangent. Why is this a problem? Here's why it's a problem. People's lives are being ruined by these kind of accusations.
Yep.
There is a professor at my school. She had just finished graduate school. This was her first job. She had just spent 6 years not making any money, not paying into a 401k, not collecting Social Security, working on her PhD. She gets her very first job in her first class. She's reading from a book, and the book intentionally has a character with a name where if you read the name, it sounds like a racial slur. Like, it's on purpose.
Oh man.
It's to, like, point something out, right? It's like
Mm.
it's an anti-racist book, but the point of giving this person this name that sounds like a racial slur is to, like, make a political point. So she merely reads that name, and you have to hear it. You have to understand what the pun is, right? She
Mm.
reads the name, the students hear it, they call her a white supremacist. They march out of her classroom. For the rest of the semester, they refuse to do any work for her. They then destroy her in her teaching evaluations.
No.
Now that was the end of her career, because to go on to her next job, it was just a 1-year job at Oxy. To go on to her next job, she has to show positive teaching evaluations. Her
Wow.
teaching evaluations said she's a white supremacist. That's it. They
Yeah.
6 years of her life, they destroyed it in 1 semester, right? So that's why it matters. So anyway, we got
Mm.
professors exempted, and we did it not by attacking the way you and I have been talking about, like, the ideology, et cetera, et cetera. We did it not by talking about the ideology. We merely talked about the potential impacts on the careers of professors, like the one I just mentioned, right? And
Right.
no professor different professors may feel different things about DEI and microaggressions. I'm sure tons of my colleagues totally believe in microaggressions, but every one of my colleagues believes that their career could be impacted if there's a report in their, like, personnel file at HR that says
Yeah.
that they microaggressed someone, right? Everyone. So
Right.
that's how we got everyone on board. We got
Mm.
the professors removed from it, and then we observed them, and we determined to our satisfaction it's actually a really good team of people. Again, this is what I mean when I say I think all the people that go into this have good intentions. The team
Mhm.
of people, the way they're doing it when students report each other, is they're actually de-escalating the situation. And
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
so they're actually doing it right, as far as I can tell.
That's good.
Anyway, so that's a success story that, on the
That's
one hand,
awesome.
we exempted, and we also asked to exempt staff, because I think it would be horrible. What if some gardener, you know, who's like a
Right.
Mexican immigrant? Because to be fair, our campus, if you come to it, the people doing the work, the grounds work, they're all Mexican American or Mexican, right?
Hmm.
Some poor guy who doesn't know all the politically correct things to say, what if he commits a microaggression and then
Right.
gets called into this disciplinary office? He's a minimum wage worker. Are you going to end
Right.
his take away his job over some student, some privileged rich student? Call it.
Exactly.
So anyway,
Yeah.
that's the success story, is that we limited the scope of this organization on, and people can reach out to me if they want to talk about how to do that on your campus.
Totally. And where
um,
can they find you? I'll
okay.
drop that in the comments.
Yes, good, good. Okay. You can email me at jake.mackey, Mackey, @gmail.com.
Awesome.
So I wanted to end with that sort of happy story about how we sort of, solved
Yeah,
resolve the threat. And yeah, it's we can win this, if we just stick together and be sensible, right?
absolutely.
Yeah,
That's really positive, and I'm glad you're able to achieve that.
yeah,
And I'm sure more things in the right direction will happen on the Occidental campus. There are a lot
yeah.
of great students there, I must say.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Had a
you've met a lot
wonderful
of them.
chance to, meet some of them, and I'm hopeful for the future. I know it
Hmm.
seems really like dark, and the way this thing is spreading, it seems like it's in a lot of campuses right now. But I'm
Yeah.
hopeful that as we have more of these conversations, spark more bravery, kind
Hmm.
of brainstorm ideas to counteract the negative effects of these things,
Hmm.
we will sort of begin to shift the tide in a different direction. Hopefully, a really good direction.
I, I
Um,
I agree with you, and
yeah.
I think if you spend too much time on Twitter and you hear people
Oh yeah.
complaining about wokeness and stuff, you would think it was the end of the world, right? But
Exactly.
I really don't think it is, and I think if we just in sort of smart, strategic ways
Yes.
push back, and never lose sight of the fact that there really is racism in the world, and there really
Yes.
are injustices, and we need to not throw out the baby with the bathwater. We have to stay
That's right.
sensitive to that stuff because it's real, but
Yeah.
we just can't. We can't do. We can't commit iatrogenic harm, right? We can't have
Oh,
the healer harm the person who they're supposed to be healing, right? Yeah.
absolutely. That's
So,
a good one. I love
yep.
that. All right.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Jake.
Thank
And
you for having me.
I am very, very, very blessed to have you expand on all of that and share some of the data, as well as introduce us to um, what was the name of the person who has done a lot of research on microaggressions?
Mm. Musa Al-Garbi, so first name
Musa Al-Garbi,
Yeah, Musa is his first name,
MUSA.
and then, last name is Al dash Gharbi, and he has a
Perfect.
website where everything he publishes anywhere, he also posts it on his website, so you can read everything he's ever
Okay.
published. Yep.
I will look into that.
Yeah, he's great.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank
Thank
you.
you. Pardon?
Thank you, Kimmy. Thank you for
Oh,
having me.
absolutely. Of course. Hopefully, we can continue the conversation down the line. But
Absolutely.
hope you have a great day. And thanks to everyone who tuned in. I'm really grateful for everyone who's just trying to do something positive and trying to keep their head high and not get swamped down by a lot of the negativity we see around us. C. Campbell says, "Sticks and stones can break your bones, but words can never hurt you. They're just words and only have power if you give it to them." Thank you so much. And thank you to other people who commented. Thank you, Dave and KL and Paxton. Appreciate you so much. But we're signing out for now. Hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll talk very soon. Bye bye.